There is a story, one not found in any single gospel, not printed in neat columns on thin pages, not recited in the familiar cadence of Sunday sermons. It lives instead between the lines, like light seeping through cracks in an ancient wall, speaking not in creeds but in currents. It is the story of a man who walked the earth without a single intention to start a religion, yet who touched the deepest fibers of human existence. Jesus, as history has painted him, and is often framed by the architecture of doctrines, rituals, and denominational walls. But what if those walls were not his? What if the heart of his teaching was not bound by the rules of religion, but was instead alive, vibrating, luminous, with the language of energy? To see this, one must first strip away centuries of accumulated dust, the councils that debated what was in and what was out, the translations that turned living words into fixed symbols, the political forces that molded spirituality into a system of control. Imagine peeling back layer after layer of varnish on a forgotten painting until the original colors blaze forth, untamed, unfiltered, unsettling in their purity. Underneath all the theological embellishments lies something profoundly simple and radically intimate. A way of being that recognizes every human as a field of energy, every breath as a vibration, every encounter as an exchange of life force. Religion, as we have inherited it, tends to codify the infinite into the finite, to reduce the raw pulse of the universe into rules and rites that can be managed. But the Jesus that emerges from the unvarnished view is not a rule maker. He is a revealer. He speaks of seeds and soil, of water that quenches thirst beyond the body, of light that cannot be hidden. These are not the metaphors of a man building an institution. They are the metaphors of a man pointing to an energy that moves through all things, a cosmic bloodstream that knows no boundaries between sacred and secular, believer and non-believer. Consider how he spoke of the kingdom of God, not as a place to be entered after death, but as a reality within you and at hand. These phrases, so familiar they risk sounding quaint, are seismic when heard with unconditioned ears. Within you suggests an interior resonance, a vibrational alignment, a frequency we carry like a hidden song. At hand suggests immediacy. The kingdom is not distant or postponed, but present, waiting to be tuned into. This is not the language of dogma. It is the language of energy, of presence, of direct experience. When he healed, he did not perform religious ceremonies as prerequisites. He touched, he spoke, he transmitted. Sometimes he healed without even being in the same physical space, as if to underline that the medium of transformation is not bound by proximity, but by connection. And connection in the realm of energy knows no walls. It is as if he were demonstrating over and over that the architecture of the soul is wired for reception, that each of us is capable of aligning with the current that restores wholeness. The historical irony is that the one who moved so fluidly, who resisted the rigidity of the religious systems of his day, and became the cornerstone for some of the most elaborate religious structures the world has ever seen. But perhaps this is part of the paradox, that truth, once touched, will inevitably be framed, named, and sometimes caged. Yet the energy he pointed to remains uncaged, like wind that slips through the smallest cracks, like sunlight that refuses to be contained. In this hidden gospel, the one written not with ink but with resonance, there is no requirement to believe in a particular creed in order to be transformed. There is only the invitation to open oneself to the frequency he embodied. His parables are not simply moral stories, they are vibrational keys. The Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, the vine and the branches, each is a portal into a way of perceiving reality where separation dissolves, where love is not sentiment, but an active, radiant force, where life is sustained by an unseen current flowing through all creation. This reframe is not an attempt to erase the traditions that have formed around him, but to remind us that the essence is older than the forms. Long before cathedrals, before councils, before canon, there was a man whose presence seemed to rearrange the very atmosphere around him. Those who met him often left not just with changed opinions, but with altered states, lighter, clearer, more aligned. This is the hallmark of energetic transmission. It bypasses the intellect and rewrites the deeper script of the self. When we approach his life in this way, we begin to see that the so-called miracles are not supernatural violations of nature's laws, but expressions of nature's deeper laws. the multiplication of loaves, the calming of storms, the walking on water. These become symbols of mastery over the denser vibrations of fear and scarcity. Mastery gained not through magic, but through complete alignment with the source field of life. Religion asks for belief. Energy asks for alignment. And here lies the scandal of the hidden gospel. That divine connection is not the property of the religious, nor the reward for moral perfection, but the birthright of every living being. If energy is the medium of divine life, then no one is excluded from it, just as no one can be excluded from sunlight or gravity. It can be ignored, resisted, or distorted, but it cannot be withheld. Jesus' teaching, when seen through this lens, is not about earning entry into a posthumous paradise, but about tuning into the living stream now, here, in the midst of whatever life presents. To walk this path is to step beyond the comfort of formulas and into the intimacy of presence. It is to stop outsourcing one's connection to the divine through intermediaries, and instead cultivate direct perception. It is to realize that the line between the sacred and the ordinary is an illusion, and that every moment, washing dishes, speaking with a stranger, breathing in the quiet of early morning, is charged with the same energy that moves galaxies. This is the invitation that pulses beneath the surface of the Gospels, beneath the layers of doctrine and centuries of theological debate. It is not a call to abandon communities or traditions, but to recognize that the true temple is built of living stones, human beings whose hearts have been awakened to the current running through all things. It is not a call to dismantle religion, but to release it from the illusion that it holds a monopoly on God. In the chapters ahead, we will trace the strands of this hidden teaching, not as detached historians, but as travelers seeking to step into the current ourselves. We will explore the patterns, the symbols, and the stories that reveal a Jesus far more expansive than the boundaries we have drawn around him. We will learn to see him not merely as a founder of a faith, but as a master of energy, a living bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the infinite. And perhaps, in seeing him this way, we will begin to feel that same energy stirring within us, calling us to remember what was never truly forgotten. If we are to journey deeper into this hidden current, this vision of Jesus as one who taught energy rather than religion, we must begin to listen differently. Not with the ears that strain to catch familiar doctrines, but with the senses that respond to vibration, to tone, to the unspoken quality of a moment. Every great teacher speaks on more than one frequency. One layer is heard by the mind, translating into words, ideas, concepts. But beneath this, there is another transmission, something felt in the body, a quiet rearrangement of the heart's rhythm, a subtle widening of the inner horizon. The first and most fundamental theme in this vision is presence. Jesus did not speak of God as a far-off entity in some celestial court. His metaphors tethered the divine to the immediate: birds of the air, lilies of the field, the bread in one's hand, the water drawn from a well. In his world, God is not approached through elaborate intermediaries, but encountered in the unguarded moment, the here and the now. This is why his healings and teachings often occurred in the streets, at dinner tables, on hillsides. The temple of energy is the living moment, and the altar is awareness. Presence, in the energetic sense, is not simply physical proximity. It is the undivided attention of the whole self, the way a tuning fork resonates when another of the same pitch is struck nearby. When Jesus looked at someone, he looked through them, into the core where the eternal spark flickers. That gaze was not judgment, it was recognition. It is this recognition that made the tax collector drop his coins, the fisherman leave his nets, the sick rise from their beds. The energy of presence calls forth the hidden wholeness already within. The second theme is alignment. In the language of religion, alignment might be called obedience or righteousness, but those words carry the weight of moralism. Here, alignment is something subtler and more powerful, the state of being in harmony with the source of life. Just as a compass aligns to the magnetic field of the earth without effort, so the soul, when freed from distortion, naturally aligns to the field of divine energy. Jesus often used the image of the vine and the branches, an organic unity in which the life force flows without obstruction. In this model, sin is not merely breaking rules, it is misalignment, a turning away from the flow. And salvation is the restoration of that alignment, a returning to the current that sustains life. Closely tied to alignment is the theme of flow. Energy is never static. It is movement, circulation, exchange. Jesus' parables are alive with this truth. Seeds that grow, water that springs forth, talents that multiply when invested but wither when hoarded. In the energetic view, stagnation is death. Hoarded wealth, unexpressed love, unused gifts, these block the current. The instruction is not merely to possess truth, but to live it, to let it move through you into the world. This is why he sends his disciples out 2 by 2, without money or extra clothes. Because energy multiplies in motion, and trust in the source is proven not in security, but in surrender. Another key theme is resonance. Every human being vibrates at a certain frequency, shaped by beliefs, emotions, and states of consciousness. Jesus' words and actions were like a master note struck in the great instrument of humanity, inviting all who heard to tune themselves to the higher frequency. This is why some were drawn to him irresistibly, while others felt repelled. The same sound that awakens one can unsettle another. Resonance does not manipulate. It reveals what is already there, amplifying either harmony or dissonance. Love, in this framework, is not sentiment, but the highest energetic frequency available to human consciousness. It is the field in which all distortions dissolve. This is why Jesus made love the central command, not as a rule to be obeyed, but as the inevitable state of one who is fully aligned and resonating with divine energy. To love one's neighbor as oneself is not an act of willpower. It is the natural overflow of a life attuned to the source. Even the command to love one's enemies makes sense here. For at the energetic level, enmity is a distortion that harms the self as much as the other. Love is the harmonizing force that restores the original pattern. Truth, in this energetic teaching, is not an abstract proposition, but a frequency that liberates. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Is not merely about correct belief. It is about direct perception of reality, unclouded by fear, illusion, or conditioning. When Jesus says, "I am the truth," he is not making a claim about personal status. He is describing an embodied state of alignment so complete that his very being resonates with the pure frequency of reality. To encounter him was to encounter truth, not as an idea, but as a living field. Another pillar is transformation. Energy work is never about remaining as one is, it is about transfiguration. This is seen in the way Jesus invites people into a radical reorientation of their lives. Fishermen become heralds of a new kingdom. Outcasts become healers. The blind see, the lame walk, not just as physical healings, but as signs of what happens when the inner circuitry is rewired. Transformation here is not the slow accumulation of moral merit, but the instantaneous shift that occurs when the soul comes into resonance with the source frequency. Underlying all these themes is the awareness of oneness. This is perhaps the most hidden and most challenging of his teachings. When he says, "I and the Father are one," he is not claiming exclusive divinity. He is modeling the state of consciousness in which separation dissolves. The same oneness is echoed in his prayer, that they may be one as we are one. In the energetic understanding, oneness is not poetic idealism, but the fundamental structure of reality. Every act of love, every moment of alignment, every resonance with truth is a return to that indivisible whole. In this light, the opposition Jesus faced becomes clearer. Systems built on control, hierarchy, and exclusion cannot coexist comfortably with a teaching that declares the divine accessible to all, here and now, without gatekeepers. Energy flows freely. Religion often prefers regulated channels. To the fearful, his message was destabilizing. To the open-hearted, it was liberation. What makes these themes more than abstract philosophy is the way they were lived. Jesus embodied presence, alignment, flow, resonance, love, truth, transformation, and oneness, not as concepts, but as states of being. His life was the teaching. This is why, centuries later, his words still carry a charge, because they are not relics of history, but vibrational keys that can still unlock the inner temple. To engage with this hidden gospel is to recognize that we are not merely students of a historical figure, but participants in the same field of energy he inhabited. The invitation is not to mimic his outer actions, but to align with the inner frequency from which those actions flowed. And in doing so, we discover that the so-called kingdom is not a distant realm, but a living current into which we can step at any moment. To step into the deeper symbolic narratives of Jesus' life is to enter a realm where every image, every act, every gesture becomes more than history. It becomes a parable written in the language of energy, an archetypal drama playing out not only in ancient Palestine, but in the soul of every human being. Symbols are the bridges between worlds, the visible and the invisible, the literal and the mystical, and Jesus spoke fluently in their dialect. His miracles, his parables, even his silences can be seen as layered metaphors pointing to the hidden structure of reality. Consider the story of the woman who touched the hem of his garment. On the surface, it is a tale of physical healing. A woman suffering for 12 years reaches out in desperation, and her affliction is cured. But in the energetic reading, it becomes a parable of resonance and receptivity. She did not engage him in conversation, did not perform ritual acts, did not even speak her need aloud. She simply aligned herself in faith. Faith here meaning not belief in a creed, but an inner certainty that the energy he carried could restore her. The moment she touched the fabric, the exchange occurred. He felt it leave him, she felt it enter her, and both knew that a transmission had taken place. This is the energetic economy. It bypasses intermediaries, flows through intention and connection, and requires only that the receiver be open to the current. The feeding of the 5,000 offers another profound symbol. Here is a crowd faced with scarcity, 5 loaves, 2 fish, thousands of hungry people. In the framework of religion, one might expect an appeal to divine intervention from above, a dramatic conjuring from the heavens. Instead, Jesus takes what is already present, blesses it, breaks it, and distributes it. The miracle is not a magician's trick, but an energetic revelation. When aligned with the current of abundance, even the smallest resource multiplies. Scarcity dissolves not because more is manufactured out of thin air, but because the field shifts. Gratitude, blessing, and willingness to share open the channels through which the flow increases. This is an energetic law. Hoarding constricts, giving expands. Walking on water is perhaps one of the most misunderstood narratives when taken literally. As symbol, it speaks of mastery over the unstable, chaotic energies of life. In Hebrew cosmology, the sea often represented chaos and the unknown. To walk upon it is to remain in a state of alignment so strong that the turbulence beneath cannot pull one under. The story also contains the moment when Peter, seeing Jesus on the water, steps out of the boat. As long as his focus is on the master frequency, he stays above the waves. When fear diverts his attention, he sinks. Here, the water is not just H2O. It is the shifting field of human emotion and circumstance. The lesson is not about defying physics, but about the capacity of aligned consciousness to remain buoyant in the midst of life's storms. The raising of Lazarus carries an even deeper resonance. This is not simply a resuscitation from physical death, but a symbol of awakening from the dense vibration of separation and despair. Lazarus lies in the tomb, bound, closed off, his life force seemingly gone. Jesus calls him by name. In the energetic realm, the calling of a name is not just identification. It is an act of summoning the true self to re-emerge. Come forth is a command not only to Lazarus, but to every soul entombed in fear, in self-forgetting, in the heavy stones of limitation. And when he emerges, still wrapped in grave clothes, Jesus instructs others to unbind him. This too is symbolic. Awakening is both personal and communal. The energy calls you to life, but the community helps remove the bindings. Parables, too, are rich with energetic codes. The parable of the mustard seed tells of the smallest of seeds growing into the largest of garden plants, a place where birds find rest. On one level, it is about the surprising growth of faith, but energetically, it speaks of the exponential nature of aligned intention. The tiniest shift in frequency, when planted in receptive ground, can expand into a field that offers shelter and sustenance to others. Energy does not measure by size or mass. It measures by resonance. The Good Samaritan, often framed as a moral story about compassion, also vibrates with an energetic truth. Love is not bound by tribal lines or institutional identity. The priest and Levite pass by, perhaps preserving their ritual purity. The Samaritan, considered an outsider, aligns with the frequency of mercy and steps into the flow of life-giving action. In energetic terms, this parable dismantles the illusion of separation and reminds us that the current of love flows most powerfully through open channels, regardless of religious label. Even the Last Supper is more than a farewell meal. In the breaking of bread and sharing of wine, Jesus creates a living symbol of energetic communion. Bread is the staple of physical life, wine the symbol of joy and spirit. In offering them as his body and blood, he is not advocating ritual cannibalism, but inviting his friends to integrate his frequency into their very being. "Do this in remembrance of me" becomes an instruction to consciously align with the pattern he embodied, not just in ceremony, but in daily life. The crucifixion, central to the Christian narrative, is often interpreted purely through the lens of atonement and sacrifice. Yet in the energetic reading, it becomes the ultimate demonstration of transmutation. The cross, an instrument of state terror, becomes a conduit through which violence is absorbed and transformed into forgiveness. "Father, forgive them" is not merely a noble sentiment. It is the act of refusing to let the energy of hatred replicate itself. By holding to the frequency of love in the midst of unimaginable pain, he shifts the field, not just for himself, but for all who enter into resonance with that act. And then, the resurrection. Stripped of its doctrinal battles, it is the symbol of the undying nature of the divine frequency. You can destroy the form, but not the field. The resurrection proclaims that alignment with the source is stronger than death, that the true self is not confined to the body's lifespan. It is the ultimate reassurance to every seeker. Nothing in the realm of matter can sever the connection to the eternal current. These narratives, when approached through the lens of energy, cease to be distant supernatural events and become living archetypes, templates of transformation available to each of us. They are not meant to inspire passive admiration, but to awaken active participation. We are each the woman reaching for the hem, the crowd with 5 loaves, the disciple stepping onto the waves, the Lazarus waiting to be called forth. In every season of life, one of these symbols may rise to meet us, offering a key to the next shift in our own alignment. To read them this way requires a willingness to loosen the grip of literalism without losing the power of the story. It asks us to look not just at what happened, but at what is still happening, right now, in the energetic field we inhabit. In this sense, the Gospels are not relics of the past, but living maps, their landmarks shimmering with new meaning each time we approach them with fresh eyes and an open heart. When we see these stories as symbols of energy in motion, the figure of Jesus becomes not a distant historical savior, but a present guide, a teacher who shows by example how to live as an open conduit for the divine current. The miracles are not his alone. They are the natural outworking of any life fully aligned, resonating in harmony with the source. The hidden gospel, then, is not merely about knowing what he did, but about embodying the frequency that made those things possible. If the hidden gospel truly speaks in the language of energy, then its relevance cannot remain trapped in the realm of abstract spirituality. For all its cosmic scope, it must touch the ground of our daily lives. Otherwise, it is no more than a beautiful constellation, admired from a distance, but of no use to the traveler lost in the desert. The teachings of Jesus, when seen as energy rather than religion, are not meant to be locked inside ornate cathedrals or confined to the pages of Scripture. They are a living current, and currents are meant to move. Integration is not a matter of reciting the right verses, but of tuning our inner frequency so that every word, gesture, and thought harmonizes with the flow he revealed. The first step in integration is awareness. Just as a musician learns to hear when an instrument is slightly out of tune, we begin by noticing when our own inner state is misaligned. This is not about shaming ourselves for feeling fear, anger, or doubt. It is about recognizing these as signals that the flow has been obstructed. Jesus' call to repent is often loaded with religious guilt, but in the energetic sense, repentance simply means to turn, to reorient toward the source. In a moment of conflict, this might mean pausing to breathe, to feel the tension in the body, and to consciously choose a response aligned with love rather than a reaction rooted in fear. In our relationships, the energetic lens transforms the way we engage. To love one's neighbor becomes less about adhering to a moral command, and more about consciously choosing to emit a frequency of compassion, even when the other person is radiating hostility. Jesus' directive to bless those who curse you is not a naive invitation to be passive in the face of harm, but an energetic strategy. refusing to match the vibration of hatred and instead holding the higher frequency that can transmute it. This is the same field he held at the cross, meeting violence with forgiveness, not because it is easy, but because it prevents the cycle of energy from spiraling downward. Work, too, becomes a sacred act in this framework. Whether one is repairing a roof, writing code, raising children, or leading a team, the energetic approach asks, what frequency am I bringing to this moment? A task done in resentment will carry that residue. A task done with presence and care becomes a conduit for life force. Jesus' imagery of the vine and branches is apt here. If the branch draws deeply from the source, whatever fruit it bears will carry the vitality of the vine. Even the most mundane job can become a place of alignment when approached with this awareness. This integration also reshapes our relationship to resources. The story of the loaves and fishes is no longer an impossible stunt from a bygone era. It becomes a model for how abundance works. In energetic terms, scarcity is not just the absence of material goods, it is a contracted state of consciousness that chokes the flow. Generosity, gratitude, and trust in the source are not sentimental virtues. They are the open channels through which energy multiplies. In practical terms, this might look like sharing your skills freely, mentoring without expectation of return, or refusing to let fear dictate your financial decisions. The paradox of energy is that it grows through circulation. Health and healing also take on new dimensions. Jesus healed by aligning the person with the frequency of wholeness. While not everyone is called to be a healer in the same way, we can each learn to become stewards of our own energetic field. This means paying attention to the thoughts we dwell on, the emotions we feed, the environments we inhabit. It may mean creating daily rhythms that restore alignment, time in nature, meditation, movement, nourishing food, genuine connection. Healing, in this sense, is not simply the absence of disease, but the restoration of flow through every layer of our being. Conflict resolution, too, shifts in the light of the energetic gospel. Jesus' approach was rarely about winning arguments. It was about shifting the field. When challenged with traps or accusations, he often responded with a question, a parable, or even silence. These responses were not evasions. They were ways of refusing to enter the frequency of aggression. In our own lives, this might mean declining to respond to provocation in kind, and instead speaking from a place of centeredness, allowing the tension to diffuse rather than escalate. Community life changes as well. If divine energy flows most freely where there is unity, then any group, whether a family, a workplace, or a congregation, becomes a laboratory for practicing alignment together. This requires deep listening, humility, and the willingness to see the divine spark in each person. In this space, leadership becomes less about control and more about creating the conditions for energy to flow. Clarity of vision, openness of communication, and shared commitment to values that uplift the group's frequency. The energetic view also invites us to reconsider our relationship with nature. Jesus often taught outdoors, using the natural world as both backdrop and metaphor. He recognized the divine current in seeds, storms, birds, and flowers. To live in alignment is to respect these currents, not to exploit them for short-term gain. Practically, this might lead us to choices that honor sustainability, reduce harm, and cultivate beauty in our surroundings. Not because it is politically fashionable, but because the health of the larger field affects our own. Perhaps one of the most challenging integrations is how we hold suffering. The cross is not a call to glorify pain, but it does reveal that alignment is possible even in the midst of it. In our lives, we will face moments when the current feels blocked, when loss or betrayal or injustice threaten to pull us under. The energetic teaching invites us to hold our alignment not as a fragile mood that breaks under pressure, but as a deep root that anchors us through the storm. This does not mean suppressing grief or pretending all is well. It means refusing to let suffering sever the connection to the source. Finally, integration requires practice. Energy responds to intention, and intention is strengthened through repetition. Prayer, meditation, service, gratitude. These are not obligations, but tuning rituals, ways of returning to resonance again and again. Even when we drift, the current remains, waiting for us to step back in. Over time, these practices become less about effort and more about natural orientation, like a river finding its course. In this way, the the hidden gospel ceases to be a distant philosophy and becomes a way of living. It teaches us to meet every moment as a point of connection, every challenge as an opportunity to realign, every relationship as a space where energy can flow more freely. In the end, it is less about following a set of external rules and more about embodying an inner state, a state in which love is the default frequency, truth is the natural tone, and presence is the ground from which all action arises. When the last page of the visible gospel is turned, and the ink of the printed words gives way to the white silence beyond, the hidden gospel is still speaking. It speaks in the tremor of the heart when we remember a moment of deep presence, in the subtle warmth of connection that needs no explanation, in the sudden clarity that cuts through confusion like sunlight through a storm. This, perhaps, is why Jesus' teaching endures, not because it has been enshrined in perfect institutions or preserved in flawless doctrine, but because the current it carries cannot be extinguished. The hidden gospel is not a message to be memorized. It is a frequency to be embodied. In seeing Jesus not as a founder of religion, but as a master of energy, we strip away the layers that distance us from him. We no longer have to imagine him as locked in a different time, speaking a language we can barely translate. Instead, we begin to sense his presence as immediate, as close as breath, as relevant in a bustling 21st century city as on a Galilean hillside. His voice is not trapped in the past. It vibrates in the present whenever someone aligns with the source and lets it flow through them. And yet, recognition alone is not transformation. The current is always there, but to be changed by it, we must step into it. This is where the call becomes personal. The hidden gospel does not invite passive spectatorship. It calls for participation. It asks each of us to become a living conduit, to move from admiring the light to bearing it. Just as the branch draws life from the vine, so we are invited to draw life from the source until our very presence becomes a transmission of that same vitality. The transformation it calls for is not cosmetic. It is not about adopting a set of spiritual behaviors while the inner alignment remains untouched. It is about allowing the deepest structures of our consciousness to be rewired. It is about letting go of the reflex to see ourselves as separate from God, from others, from the flow of life itself. It is about learning to listen for the subtle shifts in our own field, to notice when fear contracts us, when judgment hardens us, when resentment clouds the current, and then choosing to realign again and again. This transformation is not the property of the strong or the perfect. It is available to the broken, the weary, the uncertain. In fact, those moments of vulnerability may be the most potent gateways. The woman who touched the hem did not come with a polished resume of faith. She came with desperation and openness. The prodigal son returned not with a record of good works, but with empty hands. The hidden gospel insists that the current flows most powerfully into the spaces we cannot fill on our own. The call is also communal. Alignment is deeply personal, but it is magnified in connection. Just as a single note gains depth and power when sung in harmony, so our individual resonance grows when we live in circles where the current is honored and nurtured. This does not mean surrounding ourselves only with those who agree with us in every belief, but with those who share the intention to live aligned, to meet conflict with truth, to greet difference with curiosity, to anchor love in action. In such communities, the current becomes visible, almost tangible, like a river running through the center of life. The hidden gospel also dares to challenge how we measure success. In the language of religion, success might be counted in converts, attendance, or doctrinal purity. In the language of energy, success is measured in alignment, in the expansion of the field of love, in the number of lives touched, not by argument, but by presence. A single conversation that shifts someone's inner state is as significant as a stadium filled with people hearing words they do not absorb. And here is where the call becomes urgent. Our world is starved for this kind of transmission. We live in an age where information floods every channel, yet wisdom seems in short supply, where connection is simulated on glowing screens, but the deeper bonds of human presence are fraying, where fear is amplified and weaponized, while love is often relegated to sentiment. In such a climate, the energetic teaching of Jesus is not merely relevant, it is revolutionary. To embody it is to stand as a counter-frequency in the noise, a tuning fork that calls others toward harmony without coercion. This does not require public platforms or formal titles. It happens in kitchens and classrooms, in workplaces and sidewalks, in conversations that last 5 minutes, or in silent acts of kindness that leave no trace but a change in the air. The hidden gospel moves through ordinary life, sanctifying it from within. And when enough individuals carry it, the collective field begins to shift. The currents of greed, division, and fear do not vanish overnight, but they are weakened by every act of alignment, every refusal to match the lower frequency, every choice to let love flow where it is least expected. The transformational call is not to build something new in the image of the old, to replace one set of rigid structures with another, but to live in such a way that the current remains free. This is harder than it sounds, because the human impulse to codify and control is strong. We must learn to hold forms lightly, using them as vessels rather than cages. Gatherings, practices, and words have their place, but only if they remain transparent to the flow, only if they serve the alignment rather than replacing it. In the end, the hidden gospel returns us to the same simplicity with which it began. It invites us to presence, to see the divine in the moment before us. It invites us to alignment, to let our thoughts, words, and actions harmonize with the source. It invites us to flow, to keep the current moving through generosity and trust. It invites us to resonance, to choose the frequency of love again and again. And it invites us to oneness, to remember that no matter how convincing the illusion of separation, we are already connected in the field of divine life. Perhaps the truest way to honor Jesus is not to argue endlessly about who he was, but to live as he lived, open, attuned, unbound. To let the hem of our garment carry enough charge that someone else's faith can draw from it. To bless what we have, however little, until it multiplies in ways we cannot predict. To step onto the waves, not because we are certain of the outcome, but because we are certain of the presence that calls us. To stand at the tombs, our own and others, and speak life. The hidden gospel does not end with a benediction, because it was never meant to end. It continues wherever a human being chooses alignment over fear, flow over stagnation, love over separation. Its pages are written in encounters, in choices, in the invisible yet undeniable shift of energy when someone turns toward the light. You are not merely a reader of this gospel, you are its next chapter. The current is here. Step in, let it carry you. And as you move, let it move through you, until your life itself becomes the message, the transmission, the living proof that Jesus never taught religion. He taught energy. And the gospel was never hidden from those who learned to see with the eyes of the soul.